I wasn't supposed to find this. The archive room of the county courthouse had been locked for decades, its door warped by damp air and time. I had come looking for land deeds, nothing more, yet the janitor, who had been bribed with whiskey and an easy grin, gave me 5 minutes inside. The hinges shrieked when he pried them open, and I slipped into the dark like a thief. The air was damp, close, like an unwashed cellar. Dust bloomed with every step, clinging to my tongue in dry, bitter clots. My lantern cut a pale circle through the gloom, revealing collapsed shelves, bundles of paper swollen by rot, and the skeletal remains of a filing cabinet, rust bleeding down its sides. At first glance, it looked like every other forgotten repository of bureaucracy, abandoned, irrelevant, dead. But then I saw it. A ledger, sealed with red wax, its spine intact when every other book had split apart into ragged curls of paper. Someone had bound it in leather blackened with mildew, the initials SM. Etched faintly into the cover. My own hands trembled as I lifted it from its coffin of mold and placed it on a cleared corner of wood. The wax was brittle, flaking off at the gentlest pressure, but the seal itself, an old seminary crest I did not recognize, was unbroken. Whoever had sealed this book had wanted it to remain untouched, undiscovered. That alone should have been warning enough. Yet curiosity is never satisfied with caution. Inside, the handwriting swirled across the yellowed paper with obsessive neatness, each letter leaning sharply as if pushed forward by haste. The name that appeared again and again on the first 3 pages struck me with immediate unease: Sarah Montgomery, 1841. The ink was thick, deliberate, and repeated far more times than was necessary. Her name had been written as if it needed remembering, or perhaps as if someone feared forgetting it. Then there was the number. 23. It appeared in the margins, etched into the parchment over and over, sometimes circled, sometimes pressed so hard the nib tore through the paper. Twice it was written in red wax crayon, the kind used by clerks to mark censored passages. I flipped forward. Some pages had been deliberately blacked out, great slabs of ink obscuring entire testimonies. But faint impressions remained beneath, words pressed so hard into the page they bruised the paper fibers. I traced them with my fingertip, and though I couldn't read them, the ghost of their meaning seemed to echo. It was like staring at a gravestone that had weathered blank but still carried the memory of its inscription. The deeper I read, the more the book unsettled me. The ledger was not accounts or deeds, it was records. But not of land, or birth, or death. These were reports, clinical in their format, written by hand but following the same structure. Name, observation, anomaly. And always, Sarah Montgomery. Her name was entered under subject again and again, as if the writer had been forced to track her across different years, different parishes, different institutions. There were references to St. Augustine's Seminary, though the seminary in our county closed nearly 200 years ago and has no official record of ever reopening. The reports grew stranger. One claimed Sarah was 9 years old when admitted in 1841. Another, written 20 years later, listed her as 11. Still another, dated 1893, noted she had ceased to show age progression and remains in stable condition under observation. That could not be possible. By 1893, she would have been 61 years old. I closed the book quickly, clutching the leather tight, my pulse hammering in my throat. The silence of the archive felt heavier now, pressing in on me. Somewhere beyond the broken windows, wind funneled through hollow walls, creating a low moan that seemed to echo the pages. The janitor knocked at the door, his voice muffled. "Time's up." I should have left the ledger where I found it. Should have walked away, let mildew and dust keep their secrets. But the name wouldn't leave me. Sarah Montgomery. Written with a hand that seemed more desperate with each entry, as though the recorder fought against some erasure, some vanishing force that tried to wipe her away. When I finally stepped back into daylight, the world seemed thinner, drained. The ledger weighed unnaturally in my satchel. Each step I took away from the courthouse felt less like escape and more like trespass. I couldn't rid myself of the sensation that I had stolen not just a record, but a warning. That night, I laid the ledger on my desk, the lamplight trembling against its cracked leather. Every creak of the floorboards in my house made me glance up, startled, certain that I was no longer alone. But I had no choice now. Once a name lodges itself into you, it doesn't leave. Sarah Montgomery. 1841, 11 years old. Unchanging. If the reports were true, then this child did not age. If the blacked-out pages hid what I suspect, then she did not die either. And if her record survived where all others rotted away, then someone, some institution, wanted it hidden but not destroyed. Preserved, like a relic. Or a specimen. I wasn't supposed to find this. But I did. And now I must learn why. I began with the ledger, but the ledger was only a doorway. The name Sarah Montgomery haunted every page, but what unsettled me more were the institutional references: St. Augustine Seminary. Repeated, underlined. Always linked with her name. I knew the seminary, or thought I did. A Catholic mission founded in the early 1800s, it operated briefly in our county before shuttering in 1837, its students supposedly transferred to larger facilities in Baltimore. The official record claimed it never reopened. But the ledger insisted otherwise. I combed through county histories, archived newspapers, diocesan records. At first, the trail was clean, almost too clean. Obituaries for faculty, reassignment notes for priests, land deeds that placed the property back in state hands. Yet, buried in the state archives, I uncovered a set of petitions dated 1842, requests for tax exemption filed by the St. Augustine Seminary for the advancement of orphaned youth. There was no public record of its existence that year. No newspapers announcing its return, no enrollment advertisements, no parish bulletins. And yet, here were official tax documents, signed and notarized. The signature struck me, Father Elias Sterling. The name glimmered with an eerie prominence, a man determined to carve himself into permanence. Sterling's proposal, attached to the petition, read like a holy mandate. He wrote of a generation lost to destitution, children left to the cruelties of the street, and his vow to provide a sanctuary of discipline, education, and divine preparation. His rhetoric was grandiose, theatrical, yet beneath the flourishes was the precision of bureaucracy. Sterling had convinced the state to grant the seminary both land and financial exemptions on the grounds that it was a charitable institution. But who were its students? I found no admissions lists, no graduation announcements, no alumni records. A school without a single name attached to its legacy. The next clue arrived not through archives but through silence. I contacted the diocesan office, requesting information on Sterling. At first, I received polite replies: "Our records are limited, that facility predates our archives." But when I pressed further, I was met with curt deflections: "There is nothing more to provide." When I asked directly if the seminary had admitted children after 1841, the line went dead. My emails bounced back undeliverable. It was as though the church itself wanted to cauterize the wound. But bureaucracies are sloppy. Weeks later, through a neglected government digitization project, I stumbled across a census addendum from 1850. It listed, among local institutions, St. Augustine Seminary, 47 residents. The census taker had scribbled "orphans" in the margin. No names, no ages. Just the number. 47. And yet, in the following decade census, there was no record at all. As if those 47 children had evaporated. I could not let this go. I tracked the seminary's physical location, a hilltop property outside town, hidden in a copse of blackened oaks. I drove there one rain-heavy afternoon. The road ended in a locked gate chained with rust, beyond which lay a skeletal ruin, stone walls caved in, ivy thick as rope curling over broken archways. The air smelled of damp stone and iron. On the ground near the gate, half buried in mud, I found a brass plate, green with verdigris. I scraped the muck away with my sleeve. The inscription was almost erased, but I could just make out, St. Augustine Seminary for Orphaned Youth. Founded 1841 by Father Elias Sterling. To preserve the innocent against time. That last phrase lodged deep in me. To preserve the innocent against time. Not to educate them, not to prepare them for life, but to preserve them. Back home, I searched for Sterling himself. Little was known. Born in Boston, ordained in Maryland, a brief appointment as parish priest in 1833 before vanishing from public record until the seminary petition in 1842. He was spoken of in obituaries decades later, but always obliquely, a man of rare conviction, a guardian of youth, untiring in devotion. Yet I never found a date of death. Then came the letter. It arrived in a manila envelope without return address, slipped through my mail slot one evening. Inside was a single photocopy of a page from what looked like an inspection report, dated 1875. Across the top, Maryland State Commission on Charitable Institutions. The document was short, clinical. St. Augustine's Seminary maintains 23 subjects. Ages appear inconsistent with admissions records. Facilities are orderly, though dormitories remain locked during day hours. Faculty provide minimal instruction, citing obedience and prayer as central tenets. Commission recommends continued funding under charitable exemptions. The signature was smeared, but the number, 23, stood out like a wound. The same number scratched into the ledger. I stared at the page for hours. Not 47 anymore, but 23. Had 24 vanished? Or had they been reduced? That night, I dreamed of children standing in neat rows, their faces blank, eyes fixed forward, mouths sewn into silence. Behind them, a tall figure in priest's robes lifted a hand as though to bless them, but his shadow stretched unnaturally, long fingers reaching past the rows of children, curling like hooks. When I woke, my desk lamp was still burning, the ledger open to its blacked-out pages. I touched the parchment, and in the hush of my house, I swore I heard whispering. Not words, but a low murmur, like lips moving behind a wall. The deeper I dug, the more I understood, the seminary had not failed. It had succeeded, too well. Children went in, but they did not leave. Not as adults. Not as corpses. They were preserved, against time itself. And Elias Sterling had built his legacy not on education, but on containment. If Sarah Montgomery was the first, then the others were added to her number. 47 in 1850. 23 in 1875. A dwindling flock, carefully hidden, endlessly observed. The seminary was no sanctuary. It was a vault. I had begun with numbers. 47 in 1850. 23 in 1875. The ledgers, the census, the inspection reports, all spoke in sterile arithmetic. But numbers don't haunt you. Names do. And the names were missing. Every attempt to trace the orphans of St. Augustine's yielded nothing, no death records, no marriage licenses, no property deeds. It was as if they had dissolved into the ground itself. Even Sarah Montgomery, the one name that recurred, surfaced nowhere beyond the ledger. No Montgomery families, no burial plots, no obituaries. It was as though she existed only within the institution's pages. And then I stumbled upon the letters. At a regional archive in Annapolis, buried inside a collection mislabeled Parish Correspondence, 1860s, I found a thin folder of handwritten notes. They were letters supposedly written by students of the seminary, thank-you notes addressed to benefactors who had donated money. Each was nearly identical in phrasing, as though copied from a single script: "We are grateful for your generosity. We study, we pray, we remain obedient." The signatures at the bottom, however, chilled me. Different hands, yes, but all signed with the same name. Not Sarah Montgomery. Not any other child. Just, in faith, Augustine. Every letter. A dozen different hands. A dozen different Augustines. The archivist told me the letters had been kept as curiosities, examples of rote teaching at church schools. But when I laid them side by side, the effect was grotesque, an entire cohort of children erased, replaced by one false identity. Their names stolen. I needed testimony. Something alive. Through a genealogy forum, I was contacted by an elderly woman named Clara Whitcomb, age 89. Her great-aunt, she claimed, had been taken in by the seminary in 1870. Clara invited me to her nursing home, a sterile place of humming lights and bleach-scented halls. She was sharp-eyed despite her age, her hands trembling only when she reached for the papers she had saved. They called her Rosalie, Clara said, sliding a photograph across the table. But after she left, if you can call it that, she insisted she didn't have a name anymore. The photograph was faded, but it showed a young girl in a stiff black dress, staring blankly at the camera. Her face was unremarkable, but her eyes seemed too empty, as though no thought lived behind them. She lasted 3 years at home, Clara whispered. Couldn't remember her birthday. Couldn't remember our mother's face. Eventually, she couldn't even say her own name. She'd just repeat what we said to her, like an echo. Then one morning, she walked out into the orchard and never came back. Was she reported missing? I asked. Clara laughed bitterly. What would we tell the police? That our girl disappeared twice? Once into the seminary, and once into the earth? Her words shook me. Here was flesh and blood evidence, a survivor who had returned only to collapse under the weight of absence. Rosalie had not died, she had unraveled. I left Clara with the photograph, but the girl's eyes followed me. Blank, waiting, as though she had already been hollowed of herself. Later, I returned to the seminary ruins, driven by compulsion. The storm had cleared, leaving the air dense with the smell of wet leaves. I wandered through the collapsed chapel, its floor carpeted with moss. That's when I saw it, a section of stone wall, the plaster half peeled away. Children's names had been carved into it. Dozens of them, scratched with nails or knives, desperate to leave some trace: Anna, Joseph, Matthew, Lydia. But every name had been crossed out, scored through with deep gouges until the stone fractured. Only one word was left intact, repeated again and again: Augustine. I pressed my fingers to the cold stone. The grooves were jagged, violent. This wasn't vandalism. This was ritual. A week later, another testimony reached me, this one in the form of a diary donated to the County Historical Society. It belonged to Brother Thomas Avery, a lay instructor at St. Augustine's in the 1860s. His entries began mundanely, describing lessons, hymns, prayers. But as the months progressed, his tone fractured. The children are not permitted to use their given names. Father Sterling insists they answer only to Augustine. He says this will break the hold of vanity, of pride. But I fear it breaks something else. A later entry: I was asked to destroy the family letters, but I could not. The girls cry when they are told they never had mothers. One of them, Sarah, asked me why she cannot remember her birthday. I had no answer. Father Sterling says birthdays are a cruelty of time. And then the final entry, trembling with desperation: I dream that I too am Augustine. I cannot recall my mother's face. I cannot recall my name. God forgive us. There were no more pages after that. When I laid the diary beside the ledger, the letters, the photograph, a terrible coherence emerged. Names erased. Birthdays forgotten. Letters rewritten until all hands became one. Children broken into uniform echoes of a single invented identity. Not preserved against time, obliterated by it. The church called it piety. Sterling called it discipline. But what it truly was, I realized, was consumption. The seminary devoured identities the way fire devours wood, leaving only ash and smoke. And yet, through the smoke, one name had survived. One name the system could not erase, no matter how hard it tried. Sarah Montgomery. Why her? I do not yet know. But the others, Rosalie, Anna, Joseph, Lydia, they are gone. Swallowed into Augustine. Their birthdays extinguished, their letters scripted into lies, their memories sanded smooth until nothing remained. When I returned home that evening, I opened the ledger once more. A page I had not noticed before seemed to rise toward me. In the margin, faint but undeniable, someone had scrawled, "We are all Augustine. Except her." And below that, a name repeated until the ink tore through the page, Sarah. 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 The ruin of St. Augustine's had unsettled me before, but not enough to keep me away. Some places exert a pull, a gravity of silence. The seminary was one of them. I returned at dusk, lantern in hand, determined to explore its foundations. The chapel walls, collapsed and strangled by ivy, had always drawn my attention, but that evening, I noticed a half-rotted stairwell sloping beneath the altar. It was choked with rubble, but the air that funneled out was colder, wetter, carrying a faint metallic tang. I forced my way through, scraping my shoulders against stone, until the passage widened into what should not have existed, a hall of cellars. The air thickened. My lantern flame bent unnaturally as though recoiling. I moved forward. The cellars stretched into chambers larger than the chapel itself, ceilings low, lined with alcoves that resembled confessionals but without doors. Chains hung from the walls, fine, delicate chains, not for restraint but for adornment, as if children had been expected to kneel inside them and remain still. The plaster bore impressions of knees and hands, worn smooth by repetition. At the far end, I found a door of blackened oak. Its hinges had rusted away, but the wood stood firm, as though resisting time itself. Carved across it in neat rows were dozens of dates, birthdays. Each scratched with a nail or blade, but all slashed through. No dates remained intact. When I pressed my ear to the door, I thought I heard a muffled sound from the other side, a steady, rhythmic pulse. At first I mistook it for water dripping, but no, it was slower, more deliberate. A heartbeat. I recoiled, stumbling back. The lantern flickered. The architecture shifted as I moved deeper. A stairwell coiled down and down, looping in impossible spirals. I counted 23 steps, then found myself at the top again, breathless. On the third attempt, I descended without counting, eyes closed, and when I opened them, I stood in a square chamber I had not entered before. In its center sat a chair of iron, bolted to the floor. A diary lay open upon it, pages curling with damp. The handwriting was familiar, Brother Avery. Father Sterling has introduced the quieting draught, a tincture of laudanum. The children sleep for days, waking with their eyes vacant, pliant. He says it is mercy, that silence cleanses them of vanity. I fear it is erasure. Another page, they are made to sit in the chambers below, where all sound is forbidden. Hours, sometimes days. They scratch their names into the walls to remind themselves they are real. I saw one boy carve his birthday, then weep when he could not recall what the numbers meant. The diary ended abruptly, the last line scrawled so violently it cut the paper, even the silence speaks. I shut the book. And in the hush, I realized it was true. There was no sound in the chamber but my breath, yet beneath it, I heard whispers, too low to discern, like lips brushing against my ear. They rose and fell with the lantern's flame, vanishing when I turned sharply, returning when I stilled. I left the chamber quickly, but the seminary did not let me go easily. The passages bent strangely, folding back upon themselves. I would enter a hall lined with doors, each locked, and when I turned a corner I would find the same hall repeating, the same doors, though I had not retraced my steps. Once, I opened one of the doors with a shove, only to reveal another locked door immediately behind it, flush with the frame, like layers of skin. My lantern sputtered. I feared losing its light. I retraced my path, or thought I did, until I came to another sealed room, its door barred with iron. Unlike the others, this one was marked not with scratched-out dates but with portraits. Dozens of small photographs had been nailed into the wood, sepia faces of children in black uniforms, their eyes glazed, their expressions identical. None smiled. Their names were penned beneath, but all had been scratched out with ink, leaving only Augustine. As I stared, one of the photographs loosened and fluttered to the ground. I bent to pick it up. The boy in the picture, 10, maybe 11, was staring directly into the lens. But when I raised the photo closer to the lantern, I froze. His eyes were no longer blank. They were looking at me. The longer I stared, the more certain I became. His gaze followed me, shifting subtly, like the tilt of a portrait in an old house. My hand trembled. The photo slipped back to the ground. And then, the candles. There should not have been any, yet on the far wall, set into niches, 3 thick wax candles burned steadily, though I had not lit them. Their flames leaned inward, as if breathing. I approached cautiously. The moment I raised my hand, the flames extinguished with a hiss. But when I turned away, light bloomed behind me. The candles relit themselves. I left them burning. By the time I clawed my way back into the open air, the sky was black and the crickets shrieked as if to fill the void I had left behind. My skin smelled of mildew, my hands of rust. At my desk that night, I could not focus on my notes. I kept glancing toward the walls, half expecting names to etch themselves into plaster. The photograph I had dropped in the cellar, I was certain I had left it there. Yet when I opened the ledger, it slid out between the pages. The boy's eyes were sharper now. Not blank. Not hollow. Watching. And on the back, scrawled in cramped handwriting, "The silence remembers what we forget." The deeper I sank into St. Augustine's, the more I realized it was not an aberration. It was a pattern. My first confirmation came not from the seminary, but from a map. In the state archives, while combing through old diocesan property charts, I found a vellum sheet inked with small crosses marking institutions, orphan asylums, girls' academies, wayward homes. The map was dated 1869. Beside each cross, a symbol had been drawn, 2 concentric circles intersected by a vertical line. At first, I thought it was a surveyor's notation. But then I saw it again, carved faintly into the cellar wall of St. Augustine's, just above the alcoves where children had knelt. It was a mark of ownership. The more I looked, the more these symbols surfaced, burned into the spines of ledgers, inked in margins, scratched into doors. They linked institutions across the mid-Atlantic, each claiming to preserve orphaned youth. The names shifted, but the phrasing remained eerily uniform: St. Brigid's Asylum for Wayward Girls, the House of the Innocent, the Seminary of Perpetual Charity. All promised protection. None produced graduates. From Annapolis, I traced a trail westward to Ohio, where I uncovered a registry of student transfers between facilities. The handwriting changed, but the ritual did not. Names of children were crossed out and rewritten as Augustine, Brigid, Charity. Dozens of them, shuffled from site to site, as if tested for endurance. The horror was not the existence of multiple institutions. It was the realization that they communicated, that they were networked. One letter in particular confirmed this, a faded missive dated 1902, addressed to Father Sterling himself, or whoever had inherited his mantle. It bore the letterhead of an organization I had never heard of, the Order of the Fifth Veil. The language was ceremonial, but the message clear: the doctrine must remain unbroken. Identity is the first corruption of innocence. We will maintain silence until the last of them is preserved. The daughters of silence shall continue their work abroad, the fifth veil will ensure its permanence here. Abroad. Permanence. It wasn't a school, it was a doctrine. A system. A creed. And then the ledger gave me a final cruelty. I noticed something in the margins of Sarah Montgomery's pages, initials penciled faintly beside her name. W.M. My stomach clenched. My grandmother's maiden name was Whitcomb. I dug through family records with trembling hands, until I found it, William Whitcomb, 1842, unknown. A lost child, according to our family Bible. No death date. No grave. My ancestor had been transferred into St. Augustine's the same year Sarah was admitted. This wasn't only history. It was blood. It was mine. I shut the books, but the symbols stayed burned into my eyes. The concentric circles. The vertical line. The veil that never lifted. The seminary was only one cell in a body that still pulsed. A body fed by silence, by erasure, by obedience. The hollow doctrine had never ended. It had only spread. I thought my research would remain in paper and dust. But the system was never confined to archives, it waited, living, in the cracks of the present. The proof came one night when I returned to the seminary ruins with every intention of cataloging what remained. Instead, I found a light burning underground. I followed it down the broken stairwell, heart hammering, and discovered the chamber of alcoves alive again. A single candle stood at the center of the room, illuminating a girl no older than 11. Pale skin. Dark dress. Hair braided tightly as though by someone else's hands. Her eyes fixed on me, blank at first, then aware. "Will it matter," she asked, her voice papery and thin, "if I get out?" I froze. My throat tightened. I wanted to answer yes. I wanted to tell her that names mattered, that identity mattered, that memory mattered. But even as I opened my mouth, I knew the truth, she was already erased. Behind her, against the wall, hung chains as delicate as jewelry. One clinked faintly, though no one touched it. Beside the candle lay a book, not the ledger I had stolen, but another, fresher one. Its pages open, waiting for her name. But there was no name written. Only the word Augustine. Her lips trembled. I don't remember who I was. I stepped forward, my lantern shaking. "Your name is Sarah. Sarah Montgomery." She flinched, as though the word burned. "They don't let me keep it." The chamber stirred at her words. The walls pulsed faintly, as though breath moved through them. Shadows deepened, and for an instant, I saw others, rows of children behind her, watching silently. Some faces I recognized from the photographs, others from the scratched stone. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering the same word, Augustine. The ledger weighed heavy in my satchel. With it, I could expose everything, the seminary, the transfers, the order. I could drag it all into light. But I knew what light does. Names would spill out in newspapers, descendants would be forced to reckon with bloodlines they never asked for. My own family among them. Generations condemned by revelation. Or I could bury it, burn the ledger, silence my findings, allow the dead to rest in anonymity. A crime erased, but also protected. The girl, Sarah, if she was Sarah, looked at me with something close to hope. Or was it despair? "Please," she whispered. "Just remember me. That's all." The choice split me in two. To expose was to condemn. To protect was to erase again. I drew the ledger out, its leather cracked, its pages thrumming with the weight of decades. My fingers brushed a match. The children watched. The whispering rose. The candle at the center of the room flared violently, then shrank, its flame trembling as if pleading. "I can't free you," I whispered. but I can keep you from being forgotten." And I struck the match. The ledger caught quickly, flames devouring ink, curling pages to ash. I placed it beside the single candle, the smoke rising like prayer. The whispers faded. The shadows thinned. The girl smiled faintly, not salvation, not release, but acknowledgement. And then she was gone. The chamber fell silent. Only the candle remained, its flame steady, unwavering. I left it burning. The official report came 3 days later. Minor collapse at the former Augustine Seminary site. Structural instability. Possible electrical sparking from nearby lines. No injuries, no casualties. That was the story carried in the papers, tucked between announcements of harvest yields and parliamentary disputes. No mention of hidden chambers. No mention of chains or ledgers. And certainly no mention of children. I walked among the ruins again after the fire had cooled. Charred stone jutted like broken teeth. The air still carried a sour tang of smoke, and every step sent up dust like ash settling into memory. The alcoves were gone, collapsed beneath rubble and brick. The ledger I had consigned to flame was reduced to unrecognizable scraps, as if it had never existed at all. But the system had planned for this. Even in ruin, the records resisted truth. Student files had accidentally been transferred before the collapse, only to vanish in government storage. Baptismal ledgers misfiled, their pages swapped or overwritten. Bones unearthed in the soil were hastily labeled animal remains, and carted away under tarps. The order's hand lingered everywhere, steady, meticulous, erasing. Yet one thing remained. I found it half buried near the mouth of the stairwell, the soil disturbed, almost deliberately placed. A small object blackened at the edges but intact. A locket, its silver tarnished and warped by heat. Inside, beneath a cracked glass pane, was a child's sketch. A crude charcoal outline of a girl, stick-figured and smiling. On the back, in shaky handwriting, a single name, Sarah. The same name the girl had flinched from when I spoke it aloud. I pressed it into my palm until the edges bit skin. Proof, fragile and undeniable. Not enough for courts or headlines, but enough to haunt. For days I considered surrendering it to archives, but I knew the cycle: it would vanish, misplaced, or reappear sanitized in some institution's permanent collection. Instead, I kept it. A quiet act of resistance, even as silence closed in. Because the order still thrives, though now it wears other faces: foundations, endowments, educational trusts. They do not chain children in cellars any longer. Their methods are cleaner, their language bureaucratic, but their purpose endures: the remaking of identity, the erasure of history until only obedience remains. Sometimes, late at night, I hear faint whispers from the locket if I leave it on my desk. Not words, exactly. Just the sound of children breathing together in unison, waiting. I tell myself it's imagination. But the memory of that chamber, the candle that would not die, says otherwise. I wasn't supposed to find this. And still, even now, I feel the weight of their demand, that impossible plea: remember us. So I do. And in remembering, I become their witness, their curse. Because horror does not end in flame or rubble. It lingers in documents misfiled, in names scratched out, in stories cut short. It clings to silver lockets left in the soil, waiting for hands to find them again. The seminary is gone. The ledger is ash. But the children are not. They are still here. Waiting. 1.